Check. All right. Can you hear me? No. This is what everyone will think at the end, because this is going to be so persuasive. No. All right. So I wanted to do this talk for a while for a lot of reasons. The main being that here at E-gineering, we often talk about how we do things in an agile way, and we tell that to our clients. It's one of our main kind of introductions. This is what we are. This is what we do. It's what we tell new people when they come to work here. Hey, we work agile. So we're often talking about it, and there's sometimes, I think, over time, there can be a gap in what people mean when this person says agile versus what this person says. So I thought maybe a little bit of grounding would be good. This is not really intended to be provocative. I kind of triggered a little bit on the email, but the idea is here that we should have a shared understanding of what agile means. So let's go through some of this stuff. It should be pretty basic. I don't think particularly controversial in any way. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to step through a little history, cover a few philosophical points, and then we'll get into a little bit of detail, and hopefully we'll have a little discussion. We have a lot of experienced people here who probably know more about Agile than I do, and certainly plenty that know as much. So I welcome their thoughts as well. So yeah, bro. So first of all, history. So let's go all the way back. Let's imagine like we're the first people ever to write software, okay? So what's going to happen? We're going to, let's just try it. Let's write some software, see what happens. Oh, look, that was really easy. We rewrote a really small piece of software. It worked fine. It was quick. Now we're going to add some features to it. Oh, still pretty quick. Add some more features to it. Less quick, slowing down, grinding. The bigger the software gets, the longer it takes to add features, the longer it takes to debug, the longer it takes to test. This quickly was recognized as a pattern. So what did people do? Well, they wanted to try to introduce some different methodologies to help with that. So yeah, writing software without a plan works fine while the system is small. Whoops. Double tap. In 1970, a gentleman by the name of Winston Royce, who worked at Lockheed, wrote a paper, which is small, still available online, very readable. It's called Managing the Development of Large Software Systems. And in this paper, he noted the way he observed software being written in the world, like this. So here you create the requirements, you do the analysis, you do the programming design, you do the coding, you do the testing, and everybody, he kind of noted, this looks like something, right? What does it kind of look like? Yeah. It's the stairs, that's it, good job, thank you. I'm done. The arrows, it's a waterfall. So anyway, funny thing about this paper, Royce actually described this as something he observed in the world, and then went on to say, it doesn't work. So the paper that actually originated the concept of waterfall went on to say, waterfall isn't really a good process. We should use iterative cycles. So here we are in 1970, already right away we're talking about iteration. So there's been these sort of two columns of thought here in the world, starting in 1970, going all the way through until now. But let's fast forward through a little bit. 80s, 90s, waterfall's still a thing. But there are other people trying new technologies or new methodologies involving iterations, and Scrum kind of gets its start in this time. XP. There are a lot of of really influential software developers thinking about this stuff. And then the internet comes along and they can actually kind of communicate. And they find that there's sort of a convergence here. We're all kind of doing some of the same things. So maybe we should come together and kind of come up with a shared understanding. So that brings us to the Agile Manifesto. So let's go there, right? Let's see if I can do it. I don't know how this thing works. Where'd it go? I don't know. All right. Let's try this. Yeah, sorry. Let's just do it this way. Okay. So Agile Manifesto, year 2000. We get, some of the smartest software developers in the world gathering in the same place. And when you look at this list of names, it should kind of blow your mind. Kent Beck, we got Alistair Coburn, Ward Cunningham, Martin Fowler. These are the who's who of software development from our generation. Dave Thomas, founder of Wendy's. No, Dave Thomas and Andrew Hunt actually wrote Pragmatic Programmer. Ken Schwarber's an early Scrum guy. Jeff Sutherland obviously wrote the book. Bob Martin, Uncle Bob. So it's kind of amazing that this group of people, who are all highly opinionated, really, really smart people, came together and came up with anything that they all agreed on. It's kind of astonishing. But here we got individuals' interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. It's really pretty simple. Now I wonder if I can get my presentation back. Yeah, I think I can. So it's still too much for me to memorize, though, honestly. My brain will discard something. Sorry, I'm trying to get over here. My brain will discard something that it really needs if I try to memorize this. What I like is there's another article around this same time by Martin Fowler, who was on that list, called The New Methodology. So I'll just pop that up if I can get my mouse over there. Having a real problem with, I want my computer to know my head turned over that way, so move the mouse there too. Can we do that? Is that a thing? Let's see. Let's search for it.
Check your search history.
Yep. Thanks, Brenda. Look to your right. There it is. All right. So this is an article from originally written in 2000. I really like it. If I had a paper copy of this article, it would be dog-eared and have highlights and notes in the margin and everything, because I've read it, a lot of times. So I'm going to kind of crib from this a little bit going forward. You can look this up and read it at your leisure. I would recommend it. Yeah, so this is what Fowler summed it up as. And this I can keep in my brain. Okay, so Courtney, if you fall asleep, or if you guys have to go back to work, whatever, this is all I want you to remember. This is the most important thing here today. This is what Agile means. It means being adaptive over predictive and being people-oriented over process-oriented. So, internalize that, right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about Agile. There's a lot of other stuff that people say, well, Agile means this, Agile means that. And sometimes those things are rooted in these principles, but you should be able to come up with a way back to these original principles. And I feel like when I talk to clients or we have a conversation about Agile, every point that I'm making tends to come back to one of these. So I'm going to dig into them a little bit. First off, adaptive over predictive just kind of means that, look, we've been developing a lot of software. We'd love to be predictive. We'd love to predict how software projects are going to go, but we really can't. There's change. It's a reality. We just need to embrace it. People-oriented over process-oriented comes from sort of an idea which came originally in sort of manufacturing and engineering, where you create a heavy process and you stick any person into that process, and it doesn't matter who it is, they'll be able to follow the steps of the process and they'll be productive. So it's a heavy process, and usually there's metrics associated with this. So if there's a person who performs poorly on those metrics, they're gone. You just plug in a new person, and you keep doing that till you maximize productivity. But that is not the way software works, we think. The process in software is a support mechanism for the people. So we'll get into that stuff a little bit more, I hope. All right, so let's start with adaptive over predictive. And by the way, I feel like maybe a lot of you are like, I've kind of internalized this stuff already, and that's great. But let's bear in mind that a lot of our clients haven't. And we kind of see that every day, right? So part of what I want to think about here is not just how do I internalize this, but how do I communicate this stuff to my clients, right? So this is kind of an important part of what we do, and it's relevant because we are a consulting company. So we do, we're a little bit unique. If we were a software shop, all we would have to do is internalize it. But because we're actually a consulting company, we have to figure out how to also then communicate that out to the world. Okay, let's get started. Separation of design and construction. So imagine that you're going to build a bridge. What are you going to do? You're going to draw a plan or whatever. I don't know, I've never built a bridge, so I probably shouldn't even be talking about it. But you're going to take into consideration things like how many people are going to drive over the bridge. You know, what's the wind velocity, right? I mean, stuff like that. And then you're going to design a bridge, and then based on that design, you're going to understand, well, based on this design, I'm going to need this much material, I'm going to need this much labor, I'm going to need this much time. Okay, now let's go do it. And that is predictive. So we've done something predictive here. Now, yeah, it probably doesn't happen if you're building a bridge even. I don't really know, but I'm not a civil engineer. But anyway, it kind of, at least in theory, makes sense. So can we apply that to software? No, not really. So we can go into a little bit. What happened? Okay, so is it even possible, let's start with, is it even possible to create a design up front that's capable of turning the coding, the implementation, into a predictable construction activity? And that people tried this for years and still are trying it, and I'm pretty sure the answer is no. In fact, let's ask a different question. What percentage of software development is design, and what percentage is construction? So here's the trap that we're falling into, right? Implementation isn't analogous to construction. It's really more analogous to design. Every person who's writing code at any point in time is really doing design on the fly, except for maybe like 1% of the time when they're actually literally typing the words. And most of that can be automated, right? Your IDE can build a lot of your boilerplate code for you. So I think this is a good way to describe the communication here. Everyone would acknowledge that even in the bridge building example, design is costly and time-consuming and unpredictable. But we do it all up front so that we get the predictable part after the fact. Well, in software, there is no predictable part, so it's all design. So yeah, anything you can treat as construction should be automated. No? Okay. Requirements are unpredictable. I think we know about this. I'm going to kind of breeze this a little bit. You know, there's an old IT mindset that says, oh, if these users would quit changing their minds all the time, we'd get this software out. They're not very disciplined about coming up with the right answer, you know, the first time, so we need to, it's their fault that these requirements keep changing all the time. But I think, as we all know, if something is always everyone's fault but yours, it's not really that. It's something to do with the process. If you have an intersection where there's a lot of traffic accidents, in some sense, is it the people's fault having an accident? Yeah, but in some sense, you may want to look at the system that around that. And that's what we want to do here. And I think, again, I think we've all kind of internalized that. You know, when we build software, it's kind of hard to, when we first talk about software, a lot of times what we first talk about isn't what we end up as for the finished product. And so if you go off into a enclave for 6 months and build your first idea of software, you're probably going to come out with something that isn't usable. That's almost always the case. So what we want to do is have frequent touch points with the client where we display the software and pivot accordingly. Okay, so can you get predictability? Is it possible at all to make predictable software, to make software development predictable? Yes, but it's very, very expensive. In order to do it, you have to plan a lot of time, you have to invest a lot of money, and you're giving up in flexibility, basically. Or you're giving up flexibility, basically. So does this ever make sense? So this is kind of funny, actually, because the whole Falcon Heavy thing just happened. And I went and I looked, and they actually did an AMA on Reddit about 5 years ago, a software development team from the Falcon Heavy. And I thought it was going to be really interesting. It's going to be great. I'm going to find out, like, did they use Agile? Because this whole example is about when they built a space shuttle, NASA needed to do it waterfall because, hey, you got a set date. You got to, it's got to be 100% feature complete, and there has to be 0 bugs. That's when you need predictability, right? Okay, so most people don't have that scenario. But anyway, back to the AMA on Reddit, they didn't talk about it. So if anybody ever has a chance to talk to the Falcon Heavy software development team, ask them if they did Scrum or any kind of Agile methodology. I'm curious, I want to know. So iterative development is key to being adaptive. I think you guys know that. If you don't know that, you know, maybe raise your hand. We can explain it to you. So the idea is, and this is something we practice Scrum a lot here at EG, and this is a core piece of that. We produce working but feature incomplete versions of the software at regular intervals. So the software is functional, but doesn't have all the features. So then we show these to the user. Stakeholders can then look at that and say, oh, you know what? I wanted the button on the right, actually, not the left, or something far more interesting than that. So this is where it gets a little bit into the consulting stuff that I kind of teased a little bit earlier. Obviously, if something's unpredictable, it's hard to estimate. We don't know the cost. But you can make good money selling software on fixed bid. People do it all the time, everywhere. Fixed bid means fixed time, price, and scope. So I think a lot of us old-timers maybe did some fixed bid contracts in the past. There's still companies that do that now. How can you do it? Well, predictability is expensive. So you basically charge a big enough margin to be able to cover all these variables. Now, is that the right thing for the customer? Is the question that we ask here at E-gineering. And that's part of what I'm getting at when I say we are an Agile consulting company. We believe that it's better for our customers if they are Agile. So a lot of times we're talking them out of their initial instinct of, please tell me, you know, how much is this going to cost? All right, so it's not that easy, really, and I think our business development people do a really good job with that. Nick has a spiel he throws at people, which is fantastic, I think. We should probably record it sometime, in case there's a bus incident or something. There are things we can do here, right? I mean, we can fix price. If somebody has a specific budget, we can fix price but make scope variable. We can maybe give in on time and say, well, here's a burn rate, right? Here's a burn rate, and it's going to be $10,000 a week for the next 6 months, and kind of work around that. But all the while, we're trying to communicate to our clients the right way to do things. So, and there's good reason for that, and this is actually part of Nick's spiel, I think. Look, if you do fixed bid because the client wants to, that's what they really want, and it goes wrong, guess what? It doesn't just hurt you, it hurts them, because they needed the software. They wouldn't come to you if they didn't want software. But if they don't get it, then nobody wins here, right? So with Agile, at least if you fail at building the software, it happens right away. And so you're reduced to your cost. Worst case scenario, Agile's still cheaper. All right, so this is, have you read Anathem? So there's a book by Neil Stephenson called Anathem, and he creates this thing, this kind of like Occam's razor, only it's called Diax's rake. I love it. I wish it was a thing in the real world, because I would say it to people all the time. I'd like throw in their face, Diax's rake, man. But it just says, never believe a thing simply because you want it to be true. Like, how is that not we need it to be like a thing, like Occam's razor. Anyway, that's what I want to say to clients. You can go talk to other consulting companies. They may give you the answer you want to hear. But you should not believe it simply because you want it to be true. There's some realities in the world that we think Agile does a better job of addressing. So yeah, we believe in partnering and tracking true costs. And it turns out that there's actually a lot of benefits if you are holding true to the perception of reality. You can change requirements late. You can change your mind. You get more rapid feedback, so you can adjust to schedule changes faster. So it's actually for the benefit of everyone. Okay, was that it? Adaptive over predictive. Does anybody have anyone want to say anything at this point? Chime in? Questions? No? What? Oh, hey. I'll let you edit mine next time. Yes, Steve? So usually it depends on how much experience they have with software already. So somebody who's been around the block a few times usually gets it. But a lot of times we're talking to a really savvy business person who is used to talking to a contractor and getting an estimate, getting a quote, and then driving that process with that contractor. And I really respect that, but how do we then say, well, look, the paradigm with software is a little bit different, right? We might be able to give you a rough ballpark of where we're going with this, but we want you to come alongside us and check in with us every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, and work that way. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, Nick brings up a good point. What we really want to do is meet every client where they are. And so sometimes we have to spend a little time probing, asking some questions, coming to an initial understanding of how this is going to work. Yeah? And by the way, oh yeah, Dan. Yeah.
And it's always, I think it's a realistic understanding of human nature. Like, people don't understand necessarily what they want or the ramifications of what they want. Things are going to change, and that's why I like Agile so much more.
Yeah. Yeah, the reality is, okay, so maybe there's situations where predictability is good, but it's far more likely that what's going to happen is you really want that predictability. Everybody really wants it. And when you go off schedule, nobody wants to admit it, right? Nobody wants, it's so, like you see so many times it makes you pull your hair out. Like nobody wants to even communicate about the fact that we're off schedule here. It happens. By the way, does anybody doubt that this goes on? I know we have a lot of projects we run internally where we do Agile, and we kind of are maybe like a standard deviation above some of this stuff with some of the internal projects we handle. But like you guys who have never been on a client site or seen some of this at a client site know that this still happens today. It's very prevalent. All right. Let's go to people-oriented over process-oriented. I think this is also really important. So I mentioned the manufacturing example where you're cycling people in and out. So we kind of reject that idea. We say people are not replaceable parts. Part of the mindset that comes along with that is that, you know, if you think that people are replaceable parts, well, guess what? They're also not the people who can best figure out how to do the work. They're just the people that are doing the work, and the managers are going to tell them how to do the work. And Agile thinks quite the opposite. In fact, you can still see this, by the way, even, and we all do this around here a little bit, so give us some grace, but even saying the word resource, we say, oh, we're going to apply a resource to this project. You mean like a person, right? it's not, so like it's like, yeah, we'll just plug in this guy then, and this girl is next after that. But it's a little bit more personal than that. Good developers are creative and professional. Okay, so this is something I think hopefully we all know it. Hopefully everyone at your clients treats you like a creative professional and somebody who deserves to be treated that way. But that's something that we really internalize here. We don't treat people as replaceable parts. So, and you know, that's true about good developers. You don't really want bad developers. I think we've all maybe seen that as well. But at least they're replaceable. So you get that. If you want replaceable parts. Yes, that's right. Yep. So what does the people-oriented process look like, right? So we talked about, oh, well, this process is super heavy and we hate it because it doesn't really reflect reality. But, you know, we probably want some kind of process. So how can we do that? Well, first of all, developers have to buy in. The people on the team have to be invested in it. Maybe if they're not actually choosing it themselves, they're at least like they co-sign, right? They agree that this is what the process needs to look like. Developers make the technical decisions. This is important, and this thing in parentheses I put is where this usually rears its head, right? Management can't tell a development team how long it's going to take to do something. This is a big one. We see this a lot still today on people who are quote unquote agile too. Developers need to have the authority to size their own tasks. So yeah, on a people-oriented process, you know, people have roles. We have a Scrum Master. Maybe we have a front-end developer. Maybe we have a DevOps person, QA. But you know, the role structure is there as a model. It doesn't necessarily define us, right? So maybe I'm not the Scrum Master, but I still removed an impediment. Like I'm allowed to do that. Like I don't just say, that's an impediment. That's Sam's job. He's going to take care of that. You know, and vice versa. Sam might actually pick up a ticket and do like some development work. Who knows? Only if it makes sense. But we allow teams to kind of self-organize and not kind of like fall into this sort of role structure that's super strict. So I mentioned earlier about measuring productivity, and in the manufacturing model, we measure individual productivity. Well, this person didn't like put, you know, as many stickers on the jar as that person, so, you know, they're out. That's a big no-no here. We measure team productivity, not individual productivity, and there's very good incentive-based reasons for that. For example, say Courtney and I are on a project. I've got a ticket. It involves working on a new library. I've never worked on that library, but Courtney has. So I'm going to pick Courtney's brain. I'm going to take some of his time. Hey, can you tell me how this works? How would you think about designing this with this library in mind? And then, you know, I might talk to him again later, get some feedback on the code I've written. I have him do the code review. This is all taking time away from Courtney. This is all taking time away from his individual velocity. But it's saving our team velocity. It's completely, cutting my time in half. So if people have incentives to protect their own individual velocity, that kind of stuff won't happen, and you get dysfunctional teams. So we feel pretty strongly about that. This is a important principle. Business are people too. One of the things we talked about already was this idea that we're gonna have frequent check-ins with the business, and we're gonna sit in the room with them. We're not gonna have like a game of telephone where there's two people, degrees of separation between the business and the developers. We want to interact and close that feedback loop a little bit. It's one of the things actually kind of really bothers me when I see people treat developers like they're different than other professionals, shall we say. Maybe, like, we don't want that guy to be in the room or that girl to be in the room with the developer. They're kind of scruffy and, they got a t-shirt on, and, like, we don't want it. Like, okay, we're all business professionals here, right? So we should be treated that way. And we should, professionals interact with other professionals from other industries and work together. That's just part of the job. So when I'm involved with the team, I always push really hard to have developers, to have QA, to have everybody with opportunities to speak directly with the business. Sometimes you save lots and lots of time by having that communication early. Any thoughts on people-oriented over process-oriented stuff? Sam?
In many cases, when your process is heavy, people get churned under it, rather than people being lifted up for the gifts that they have, what they can do for the project. When we include the business people in that focus, they know that we are on their side, that we're not just running them through our process to get money out of them. They know that we are looking to give them the right solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That got me thinking about a couple of projects I was on where there was this thing where there was BAs on this project, right? There were BAs, and then there was development, and there's QAs. And the BAs would always talk to the business. Eventually, we reached a point where the developers would also go in and contribute to those conversations, and it was great. It made things a lot better. Well, guess what? It was a pretty complicated project. So there was a really good QA guy on this team, and he ended up building a fantastic test harness that encapsulated all the requirements that the business had created. And what we did was we put the business person down directly with that QA person and said, let's talk through, like, this is my assumptions. I'm making really detailed tests, and these tests define basically how the system is going to work, because the developer is going to have to pass these tests before they go in. And by doing that, the business was like, aha, I never thought about it at this level of detail. In these initial meetings, we talk about it, and it's all in your head, right? But now that I see kind of the inner workings of, there's a lot of assumptions that I'm making here, we were able to make a few tweaks, just move the process along like crazy. So it's great. That's that piece, I guess. So a couple finer points I want to kind of highlight. And we were just talking about this before the talk, Courtney and I. So semantic diffusion is a neologism describing what happens in neologisms. So that's clear. So no. Agile is an example of a neologism. It's just like a new term or expression that's used to describe some concept that's sort of kind of newish. So Agile is something that came along to describe this new way of doing stuff. And semantic diffusion is a thing that describes what happens to neologisms, which is that they undergo definitional change or kind of ambiguity, a phase of ambiguity. So like, what's a good example? Like, I don't know, fake news. So fake news, yeah, you guys know the deal. So anyway, somebody talks, there's perfectly innocent reasons why this kind of thing happens. Somebody talks about Agile to somebody else overhears that, they get a slightly different idea in their head, they talk to someone else about it. It's like a game of telephone. So we end up hearing things like, oh, Agile means we're going to work as fast as we can and we're going to create crappy throwaway POCs. And that's not what Agile means, but maybe people might say, Agile involves like getting rid of all process, we're just going to cowboy it up over here. And that's kind of hard because, like I said, we identify as Agile here at E-gineering, and we don't identify with those things, either of them. So it's a little bit of a challenge. And Courtney mentioned that some people are now saying agility to try to like take it back, right? So I don't know if that's the right theory, but what I will say is it's good. This is one of the reasons why I had this conversation. It's good to be aware of the finer points of the philosophical backing here. So it's a little bit more important to me whether or not Agile is being misused as a word, whether or not the spirit of Agile is being violated on the project. So if somebody says they're being Agile, but they're not being adaptive, that's something that we can call out. And we can call it out without having a semantic argument. We can talk about the details of what's going on there. So I don't know, that's just a thing we commonly face. I think as humans, we're really into trying to define things and kind of closing on the box on what does this word Agile mean. Well, let's think about what the spirit of Agile is, and let's try to kind of stick with that, right? So that's sort of a philosophical thing for me. Thank you. Scrum's an Agile methodology. You guys, everybody know what Scrum is? Do I need to define it? I hope not. It's okay if you don't. Just talk to me later. So what I want to talk about here, by the way, if we do want to talk a little bit more about Scrum, we could have another talk about that, maybe where we talk about some of the kind of a little more detail around Scrum and some of the pieces of it, and maybe talk about Kanban, compare and contrast, talk about some case studies, talk about why some of the stuff we do in Scrum makes sense. We can maybe do that another time if you guys are interested. But what I want to talk about right now is, I keep doing the wrong thing. Scrum is an Agile methodology, but Agile isn't the same as Scrum. So sometimes this comes up a little bit. Sometimes it's not really that big a deal, but you can be Agile without doing Scrum, and you can do Scrum and really not be Agile. Those are both possible. But where I see this rearing its head a lot, and I just want to call attention to it, because I want us to be aware of it on projects that we're on. Okay, Scrum is a great project management tool, but Scrum is completely agnostic about your technical practices. So this is Scrum or Agile technical practices are just as important as Agile project management techniques. So it's good that we have Scrum here to give us guidance around project management, but we should not use that as an excuse to ignore the technical practices that go along with it. We should treat that as the same level of importance. When we set up a new project, for example, we're going to talk about, well, this is when we do our daily stand-ups. This is when we do our sprint reviews. This is when we do retrospective, et cetera, et cetera. And that's great. We've got all that set up. We got our Scrum process in place. Now we need to talk about the technical practices. What are we going to do? Are we going to set up a continuous integration server? How are we going to handle code review? Are we going to do some different design review? What are the things we're going to do? So let me run down. I don't want to go into any detail about this stuff. We can can if you want, but these are all Agile practices: continuous integration, unit testing, testing. So what's our test plan? What's our strategy for how are we going to do testing on this project? We need unit testing. We need integration testing. Maybe we're going to do automated testing in the browser in this project. Maybe we're not. Maybe cost benefit isn't there for us. But let's talk about it a little bit. Refactoring. This is obviously something to do with code. Coding standards are important. Code review. Paired programming is crazy. Blowing my mind. So the point is not that we need to do all these things. The point is that we need to have a conversation about them when we're engaged with an Agile project. Thoughts? Questions?
I would throw design review in there as well.
Yeah, design review, for sure. Okay, so this is it. We're at the last slide. We did pretty well time-wise. I was afraid I was going to go over. It shows I don't know what I'm doing. So E-gineering, it's an Agile consulting company, and that invokes, this is a little bit of recap, but that invokes some certain questions and comments. First, we kind of talked about this already. How do we sell our services without having predictability? Like I said, Nick has a spiel that he does a great job with this. But this is something, like I would welcome insights, okay? I don't think we've really figured it out 100% because it's pretty difficult. But we do know that it involves meeting the client where they're at. It involves, kind of internalizing what's best for them. And then, hey, if they don't like that, that's too bad. But we think most of the time it actually works out. How do we tell clients about the real costs of software development? So this is something, I think Nick might have coined this. He's not even here, is he? There's something called the Mark Smalley School of Sales. So he's not here for me to pick on him, but I'm going to do it anyway. Maybe he's watching on YouTube. He'll slack in and defend himself. But the idea of the Mark Smalley School of Sales is I'm a client. I want to build some custom software. So I call Mark Smalley and I say, Mark, I need to build some custom software. So let's go sit down in a room. And here's what I want to do, Mark. I want to build, Facebook for lumberjacks or whatever. So, I'm going to have a feed. You're going to take pictures of trees that I chopped over, whatever. And, what do you think? How long is that going to take? What's that going to cost? So Mark, what Mark will do is now he's going to spend the next hour telling you all the reasons you should not do that, right? So this is like the worst sales pitch ever. So, but sometimes I think it might have a little bit of reverse psychology, right? Like, oh, this guy, why is he trying to push me away? He must have something I really want. So I don't, I don't really know. But we call it the Mark Smalley. Really, all of our business development has a little bit of this aspect. We're trying to talk people out of making bad decisions around software development. And this can be a really good, for you guys, the reason this is so great is by the time a project falls into an implementer's hand or a designer's hand or whatever, the client's already heard all this stuff, right? Whereas if you have a kind of a typical sales situation, the opposite is true. They've sold a bill of goods and you have to kind of talk them back off the ledge. So this is, I think, a really crucial part of our philosophy here is to be frank with clients about the cost of software development. And I think we're really good at it. I think Nick gets a pat on the back. So this is kind of a shout out for people who, let's say maybe their client is a little less than enlightened, right? You're working at a client and they haven't quite figured out all the right practices here. So how do we handle that? That's kind of believe me, I've been there, right? That's a really hard thing to do. You're frustrated because here at EG we have all these really kind of high and lofty ideals. We do things the right way, but here I have to go up to this client that hasn't figured all that stuff out, and we have to figure out how to communicate that, right? So a lot of times we have to keep a couple mental models in our mind. We have the sort of the ideal, how we think this should work, and then we have this is how it's actually working. And so there's a big gap between understanding those two things. How can we bridge that gap, right? What's some strategies we as consultants can do to kind of move reality closer to sort of the ideal? Relationship building is huge. It's a really important part of what we do. Developing trust with our clients. You can lead by example. If you're on a team with some other developers, a lot of times if you are super productive and you produce good code, people want to be like you. So you can kind of use that as an opportunity to kind of bring people in your fold. Go for quick wins. This is sort of a principle here, sort of an emergent principle. How are we gonna, we don't want to build the entire thing, the whole enchilada right away. We want to, that's a mixed metaphor. Anyway, one thing to be careful here is there are some things that are kind of fake quick wins. So like one thing I see a lot is, so I set up a continuous integration server for our client because we really do continuous integration. And yeah, that's a quick win. We got a continuous integration server. And now it sits in the corner and nobody checks the emails. In fact, it doesn't even send any emails anymore because everyone's just ignoring it. So setting up a continuous integration server, really quick, really easy. Doing continuous integration is really hard and it's never going to be quick. So beware of kind of, this is like, I'm a developer. I know how to do this. It literally takes like an hour to set up a continuous integration server. But I'm thinking more along the lines of things like, okay, well, we're on a development team. Say there's another developer on my team, and maybe I kind of convince her to kind of let's review each other's code, right? Let's sit down and talk about our designs for our code, and maybe over time we start to kind of hold each other accountable about unit testing, right? Just like at the individual personal level. Oh yeah, then we at least the two of us are writing good unit tests and we're checking each other over. Hey, now that we have unit tests, why don't we set up a continuous integration server? And then we'll know if the unit tests fail right away. And then maybe the third developer says, oh yeah, that's cool, you guys are doing good work, I want to join in. And that's more like the wildfire kind of approach is where you can kind of get some quick wins there. That's it. Does anybody want to, I just kind of blasted through a lot of stuff there. Does anybody have any, yeah, Jacob?
That I work on has a lot of regulatory stuff baked in that's very waterfall oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Requirements, documents, they have to produce, all of the waterfall steps. And so how do we move them toward
Mm-hmm.
more agile within such a constrained environment?
So, Greg's not here, Greg Reed. Craig is. I think, he's like, what? Don't talk to me. CRI has similar situations. I guess I should say their client has similar situations. And I think one thing that we did when I was there, and I don't know, maybe you can talk a little more about it, but we created a sort of a bubble of insulation where inside the bubble we were still kind of doing Agile, but it's a little harder. I know with you, you're integrated with the team, so you don't have that ability to kind of pull something like that off, whereas on that project, we were our own team. So I guess, I don't know. I think, like I said, like thinking about it strategically, like can I kind of team up with one of the other developers and maybe just he and I can do some Agile development together, and I don't know. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
I think it goes back to predictability. Like, if there's these certain inputs, certain outputs, like you just have less room to. But yeah, you can sort of, at least the development process, you can do in an Agile or Scrum methodology, kind of bookend that way.
I also will say, when I was on one project, I couldn't get anyone else to do anything, so I built my own Kanban board. And I just worked off of my own Kanban board where I was constantly hitting impediments and stuff, so it was the right approach for me. But I was organized that way, and then people would come by my desk and say, "Oh, what's that?" You know, and I'd say, "Oh, it's my Kanban board. Let me tell you about it." But yeah, Jason.
Yeah, I think you have kind of hit on the themes of your question, Jacob, is that is actually, I think back like the last 12 years, I've been having almost entirely regulated environments, regulated clients. I think it depends on the client to what degree you can apply philosophies of Agile. You know, they are heavy in documentation because they may have to be because of government oversight or whatnot. That part, like Todd said, might have to be insulated or separated, but where you can find places to apply some of the Agile principles, that's probably the best way I can think of answering it.
And you can still, yeah, and you can still internalize, right? We know we're going off track, right? Whereas, like I said, there's sort of you know, nobody wants to admit that we're running behind schedule. But if you're doing Agile internally in your team, you know it. You can yell and make a big fit about it, and because you're a consultant, really, they can't do anything about it. Right? You're just speaking your mind. You're saying, "Hey, look, maybe nobody wants to kind of bring this up, but I think we're running a little behind here on this project." So, Nate.
I've noticed like a pattern of clients that like are very agile, like they're definitely not waterfall, but they're just like moving really fast and they're not doing it super well. And I mean, you kind of talked about that, but one thing I've seen over and over again is like there's like no documentation, like because we're moving so fast
Mm-hmm.
that it's just not, you know, it's just, they don't prioritize it. And so then particularly if the project drags on, new people get involved, they come in, and it takes them a lot longer to get up to speed because there's no documentation. There's always like problems with that. So I wondered if anyone had any like good experiences with like doing documentation with Agile.
The last part of the manifesto that Todd kind of skimmed over
Sorry.
was
I'll find it.
not that there is no value in the things on the right. It's just that we value the things on the left more. There is value in having documentation on your project, but it shouldn't be the only deliverable that you have. And where people get mixed up on this is they try to throw those things on the right away, saying, well, they're telling me the things on the left are what I should be doing. No, they're saying it's more important to do those things. Yes, we do value working with people, but we have to have the processes and tools to track what we're doing. Working software is what we are after, but we have to know how that software is supposed to work.
Mm-hmm.
If we hold to these things on the right, we're not doing a good job. But it doesn't mean we can throw them away. We have to have them.
Yeah, and I think the Fowler article talks a little bit about that too, having intelligent documentation. And this, I think I alluded to a little bit of time. I mean, there's that expression that all models are wrong, but some models are useful. Well, usually documentation is wrong as well, but sometimes it's useful, right? Sometimes you can actually, you know, it's better to start with some documentation than none at all. So trying to figure out where that is kind of a, it's kind of a like advanced skill, I think. It's
When the documentation is not kept up with
that's a really good point. Yeah. So then you have to watch out for that. Okay. Well, this is the documentation for how to set up your developer site, your developer environment, and it's like, you know, from 4 years ago, and all it's going to do is force you to install a bunch of software you didn't need. Yeah. So bad or unkept up documentation is worse than no documentation at all. That's a good point.
Something we did on one of the projects I was on was, it was more along the lines of technical debt, but you know, we found that like, after we've been developing for a long time, like, our sprint would get filled up with new features coming up from the client for bug fixes or whatever. And, you know, I think ideally you have a long view, your client, your product owner has the long view. You can say like, oh, hey,
Yeah, I think that's a common recommendation. You know, let's improve our build practices. You know, et cetera. Like maybe we need to upgrade to a new dependency management tool. Let's pick something like that off every sprint. Yeah. Any other thoughts? I know there's like, I mean, there's literally like a semester worth of of stuff that you could talk about in terms of agile development, and even in terms of you know, some of the finer points like Scrum or yeah, some of the technical stuff too. But yeah, try to keep it within this time frame. I think if anybody's got ideas for, you know, another talk where we break out a concept that we kind of maybe touched on here, I'd be welcome to hear those things as well. If not now, like email them to me. I've already got some emails from people. So last chance.
I have a question. It's not like a future talk. It's about the Agile still. When Agile is not all about us here, about EG. It's sometimes about, like, you know, having the customer or the client understanding what is it. And sometimes they think they do, but they're not. So how can you gently educate them without being offensive, you know?
That is, yeah. That's like our life's work here. And it's interesting you asked that as a QA person because, you know, the QA example I gave earlier is a good one. Okay, well, rather than, you know, go in circles trying to argue about this, I'm going to show you. This is my test case. This is what I understood you to say. Can you confirm that this is how you expect the system to work? And you know, it might take a couple iterations, but. Okay, good. You guys save me some chicken? Ed, is there chicken over there? All right. Thanks. Sarah is best. And Sarah, say thanks to Sarah for setting up the lunch. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think in terms of what's on the docket, Clay's going to talk about Kotlin, unless he's backing out on me. No, he's nodding his head. Brad, I think, had something in the works, but he left, so I won't speak for him. But we want to try to do something like this every month or so, get together as a group, and I hope we all know a little bit more about what does it mean that E-gineering is an agile company. So thanks a lot.